Imagine a world where everything has always been the same. A world with one common language, one way of dressing, one religion, or none at all. The same music, the same arts, the same social habits and practices. All of us with exactly the same way of life. Now think of the world the way you know it. Think of history, think of the present, and think of the future. Since the dawn of time, humanity's greatest feature has been its diversity, the uniqueness of its people, its tribes, its empires. But humanity didn't just happen to get to where it is now. There was a process and evolution. Creation of writing systems, language, customs, beliefs, advances in technology and the arts. And over centuries, Earth has witnessed many great civilizations rise and fall. Ancient Egypt, Indus Valley, Maya, Nok, ancient Greece, the dynasties of ancient China. As time goes on and life evolves, everything comes to an end eventually. But does culture actually die?
What we're witnessing, of course, is the death of permanence. A new society is being created around us, built from the broken pieces of today. And those who people that society are going to live in a different world.
Culture is a very loaded topic, and it means a lot of different things to different people. To dissect culture in a way that satisfies everyone is virtually impossible, but I think it's such a beautiful thing to explore. And just to clarify, in this video, when I say culture, I'm referring more to societies and civilizations and the physical things they created. The obvious things we can see and easily attribute to them. So I'm speaking about culture in a very basic sense. But for the record, I don't think there's a right or wrong answer to the question, does culture die? So it's a question that I struggle with a lot. I mean, it's quite common to hear people lamenting about how certain cultures are dying, but is that really the case? To me, there seems to be enough evidence to suggest that, yes, culture dies, but there's also enough evidence to suggest that maybe it doesn't. Maybe what happens is that culture is bound to merge with a new culture and sort of evolve into a new one instead of completely dying off. I can really understand both sides of the argument, but I want to dive deeper and explain how this all makes sense to me. What we refer to as cultural death can happen in different ways, and I like to split those ways into direct and indirect causes of cultural death. Now, quite interestingly, in this 21st century, the common way culture is being lost is through globalization. As the world becomes more interconnected, there seems to be this subtle loss of identity and values because there's just this constant meshing of cultures. But hang on, hold that thought, because this globalization issue is a mammoth of a topic on its own. So I don't really want to go too deep into it, maybe in another video. For now, I really want to focus more on the direct causes of cultural death, basically the more physical death of a culture. In this case, you could have scenarios where a tribe or a civilization loses its natural habitat and in the process begins to die off. You could also have disease killing off a population, and you could also have isolation as a factor. For example, the Pygmy tribe in Central Africa lives deep in the rainforest, and because of that, they don't have any access to the global economy, and they also don't have immunity from Western diseases, and both of those factors have actually contributed to their declining numbers over the years. You could also have ethnocide, or the intentional killing off of a certain group of people, which the Nazis notoriously attempted in the 1900s. And quite famously, as we've seen in ancient history, natural disaster can completely wipe out societies. Two years ago, I spent 4 months living in a remote fishing village in Greece called Legrena. I was doing an internship. And one weekend, I decided to take a little break and head over to Santorini, which, by the way, is completely worth the hype. Like, wow. Anyway, while I was there, I took a day tour of the island and ended up visiting the archaeological site of the ancient city of Akrotiri. Akrotiri was one of the homes to the ancient Minoan civilization, which flourished from about 3000 BC to 1400 BC. And Akrotiri was an amazing society. They had a democracy system. People lived in 2-story, 3-story houses. They had underfloor heating, cold and hot running water from the taps, and some of the first recorded indoor bathrooms with a complex drainage system. This is 3000 BC, by the way. This was also during the Bronze Age, so you can imagine how freaking good they were at painting, sculpting, and making furniture. But somewhere down the line, around 1600 BC, the city would be completely wiped out. The volcano Thera erupted and literally blew out the entire center of the island of Santorini. This is one of the largest volcanic events ever recorded in history, and by the time the eruption was done, Akrotiri was completely buried 200 feet below volcanic ash. And the actual physical shape of the island of Santorini was changed forever. The eruption had created a caldera that was 4 miles wide. Literally a hole in the middle. Eventually, over the years, Santorini would be recolonized by various strong groups like the Romans, the Dorians, the Phoenicians. But Akrotiri was left alone. Nobody knew it was there because it was completely buried. And it wasn't until the 1800s and 1900s that excavations really began to start on Akrotiri. And what archaeologists found completely blew their mind. Under all that volcanic ash, the city was still well preserved. All the artwork and bronze work and infrastructure was still mostly intact. And those discoveries have helped historians understand Akrotiri way more than they could before, just like the city of Pompeii in Italy and the eruption of Mount Vesuvius thousands of years later. So on this tour, I'm just standing there thinking, wow, I'm literally standing where this complex ancient civilization once stood, but they don't even exist anymore. The culture is dead. And then the thought hit me, what about everything you are literally looking at right now? Thousands of years later, still intact. Fragile, but still intact. Doesn't that count as being alive? Alright, let's put Akrotiri aside for a second and switch gears a bit. Let's consider those cases where we can easily see that a culture isn't going to be around for much longer. Like archaeologists and historians have done all their studies, the numbers are up, and it's just not looking good for this culture. In these cases, I think it's fair to say that the culture doesn't just die at once. Instead, there are several elements of that culture that slowly, over time, begin to fade away, which is why we're able to predict that this culture won't be around for much longer. But let's take one of those crucial elements, language. I would argue that language is probably the most important and also the most vulnerable element of a culture. But what about religion? What about art? What about the economy and other things? All important, but in a very general sense, language sort of summarizes a community's history and a large part of its cultural identity. I know the topic of language can be a sensitive one for people because there's sometimes a complicated past behind the languages that people speak, and there's a lot of mixed feelings about those languages. So again, I'm being very general here and just thinking basic anthropology of tribes and language. But in the world today, languages are dying out fast. There are an estimated 6,000 languages in the world today, and according to UNESCO, the UN body that oversees all things cultural, about 43% of those languages are endangered. That is about 2,500 languages in danger of dying. On the northern Japanese island of Hokkaido, there is a tribe of people called the Ainu. They were the very first people to settle in Hokkaido, but over time they've been forgotten. They've also historically been marginalized in Japan, and over the years many of their descendants have assimilated into Japanese society, so they don't even know their real cultural roots. Hashtag globalization. And both of these factors have caused a significant decline of the Ainu population. There are now only about 25,000 Ainu left in the world. Anthropologists have been fascinated with these people because of their cultural, linguistic, and physical identity. Genetic analyses have shown that although the Ainu have some genetic relation to the Japanese people and the Eastern Siberians, they are not closely related to any modern ethnic group in the world. That is like ridiculous to me. But there's more. Perhaps even more incredible is that linguists have been unable to find any other language in the world that resembles Ainu. That is just mind-blowing to me because this is literally a dying tribe that is so ridiculously unique. And I keep asking myself, like, what happens when the last Ainu dies, whenever that time comes? I mean, just think of how many tribes in history have literally just faded away like this and we have no idea. It's crazy and it's pretty sad, honestly. Okay, maybe it is the cycle of life, things live, things die, culture included, but cultural heritage is a real thing. All the customs, practices, places, objects, artistic expressions, and values passed down from one generation to the next. How do we keep these things alive? Is it enough to just talk or learn about a culture and preserve its artifacts? Like when you go to a museum, do you feel that the culture on display in front of you is alive, or is it just mummified? I don't know, that's for you to decide. But this is exactly what I was struggling with when I was standing in what used to be Akrotiri. In 1972, UNESCO decided to safeguard places of high cultural importance, either man-made or natural things that are seen as things humanity should be proud of, basically. Machu Picchu, the Great Wall of China, the Taj Mahal, Stonehenge, the Serengeti. And it's a pretty big deal to be recognized on this list because these sites gain international recognition and legal protection. And if necessary, the World Heritage Fund can lend some funds to the governments where these sites are to do some reconstruction work. But just the fact that this list exists shows how serious the issue of preserving culture is. In Syria, for example, so many historical sites and artifacts have been destroyed by ISIS over the years, some of which were the oldest in the world.
Meanwhile, there are reports this morning that ISIS has destroyed parts of the most important temple.
Syrian temple built nearly 2,000 years ago is now a pile of rubble.
More than 3,000 years of history obliterated.
The Islamic State militants are reportedly demolishing ancient archaeological sites in Iraq and Syria.
Ancient murals and statues lie shattered.
It might be impossible to know what has been lost here.
As human beings, we want to be able to look at our societies and say, this came from our ancestors, or we want this part of our culture to endure so we can pass it down to the next generation. I think we have a sort of duty to preserve culture, and not to be like, you have a duty to preserve culture, not like that. I mean, but if you think about it, we kind of do. If you love spending Sundays analyzing artifacts in a museum like I do, then you'll feel the same way. If not, then... But culture illustrates history, and history helps us understand ourselves, those who came before us, and those who will come after us. It's important for our societies to preserve cultural artifacts, repair damaged ones, teach people their language, especially the endangered ones, share culture with others, and respect foreign culture, norms, and heritage. It doesn't matter whether or not culture dies. The bottom line is that culture is not linear and rigid. It is cyclical and malleable. People will always incorporate elements of other cultures into their own. That is how human societies evolve, because ultimately, culture opens up the larger question of what it means to be human, and that is a journey that we all share together. Okay, thank you for watching. Like I said, this is a topic that will mean a lot of different things to different people. I just wanted to give my thoughts on the matter, and I hope it made some sense. But I just love culture. I feel like there's just so much to dive deep into. So I guess this is the official announcement. This video will be the first of a culture series that now I've launched it, so yeah. But I hope you guys love it. Keep checking back in for more videos. I'm super excited for all that is to come in the series and outside the series, you know, like just general videos. But it's going to be a lot of really cool stuff. And I would love to read your thoughts as well in the comment section. So please comment as often as you'd like, whenever you want. And yeah, thank you for all the support, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.